Welcome to the Marmara Urban Forum for 2021. I'm very pleased to be together with you. My name is Kaan Yıldızgöz from UITP, International Association of Public Transport. Actually, we are partnering with Marmara Union of Municipalities for organizing this session at this Marmara Urban Forum. I know it's a closing session maybe for the forum, and it's this Sunday afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us. It's on a very important topic that we will be discussing this afternoon with very experienced speakers coming from different parts of the world. We have speakers from Turkey, but not only from Turkey, we have speakers from as well from Americas, from Mexico, and as well from Cambodia, joining us to discuss about this important topic. This session will be focusing on informal transport, which is an essential issue, especially in the developing countries. In many parts of the developing world, informal and unregulated transport operations represent a significant, if not the only, mode of public transport available to many citizens, and while providing vital services to large amounts of people, often in regions undergoing into rapid growth, informal transport can also represent a challenge to transport operators and decision makers to regulate and integrate them into these services. Furthermore, informal transport networks often go hand in hand with the private car use and thus pollution. So today, actually, we have different speakers coming from the different backgrounds. It will be a very interesting discussion that we will be having. I will not be losing a time to introduce the session, but I want to go with introducing briefly our distinguished speakers. We have here Mr. Feyzullah Gündoğdu, coming from city of Kayseri, from Turkey. Mr. Gündoğdu is the CEO of Kayseri Transporte, and especially in recent years, they had a very important project for organizing the individually owned bus operators in city of Kayseri. They moved from net cost contract to the gross cost contract, and Mr. Gündoğdu will be sharing their experience with us as well. So our second speaker is also coming from Turkey. We have Sinem Dedetas with us. She is the CEO for Istanbul City Lines, which is the waterborne transport operator of City of Istanbul. But Sinem Hanım is also managing a project for organizing the individually owned boat transport in City of Istanbul. Our other speakers, Mr. Angel Molinero, is coming from Mexico City. Angel is working for Mexican Union of Public Transportation. He's a very experienced public transport expert in Latin America. He has books, different books in public transport domain, and Angel will be with us to share the Mexican perspective on the topic. Joachim Bergerhoff is joining us this afternoon from Phnom Penh, from Cambodia. Actually, Joachim will be sharing with us the Asian perspective, especially Southeast Asian perspective on the topic. And Joachim has a very important experience in public transport as well. He worked in UITP in the past. He's my former colleague, working together with us at UITP. And later he had different experience in Middle East, in Africa, in Eastern Europe, in different countries. We have another speaker, but there was a technical problem. We will see Fatima Arroyo coming from World Bank. She will be joining us later if we can solve this technical problem. So let me start now the session with Feyzullah. So I just want to hand over the microphone in an online way to Feyzullah now to share his experience with us from the city of Kayseri. Feyzullah, floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. I am going to speak in Turkish. Sorry about that. So let me start my presentation, then start speaking also. Is it okay?
Yes, Feyzullah, we see your presentation. Okay. You can go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, sorry, I'm mixing the English and Turkish. So I will start in Turkish. Kayseri'de biz mevcut Kaan Bey de
In Kayseri, as Mr. Kaan also mentioned in the beginning, this formal and informal concepts. We can call it individual ownership or unorganized. And we changed the models of doing this, and back in 2017 with the project. Why? We looked at how we proceeded, and I want to explain what we did. Today, it's mostly about the institutionalization of the transportation during the COVID. That's what I'm going to talking about. You can see this graphic on the screen, which reflects the patterns, international patterns. Some days we had very little passengers. You can see it. Some days we carried only critical personnel, but public transportation dropped to rates of 10% in Turkey. But now it's again about 70%. What this means, in cities with this model, individual transport, the cities that have this model, they experience difficulties. So it's based on the income from the passengers. Without the passengers, those people who manage these transportation networks have to pay it for themselves. And even though Turkish government announced some support programs, we experienced some legal issues, and many of people couldn't access to these aids. As I've said, the passenger rates dropped to about 10%, which created a lot of financial problems. And they tried to raise their voice on social media. They tried to explain what they have been going through, but they haven't been able to receive a lot of support. And also another important subject here is that the contract models have been talked about. Instead of net cost, we move to gross cost subject was being debated, but we all know that a lot of crises bring also a lot of opportunities with them. So maybe the crisis of COVID-19 pandemic helped us question the system so that we can start something new from it. And this was like an opportunity for us. Because this means that if transportation stops, the life in the city will stop. And nobody wants that. So transportation systems have to be working all the time. And we saw that net cost models didn't actually help us with our needs. So maybe this can be an opportunity to consider after the COVID-19 pandemic. And there are three main aspects here. For example, the system has to be reformed. Secondly, change to use scale economy and other benefits. And lastly, net costs to gross cost. These are all in parallel, especially when it comes to Turkey. When we look at the public transportation structure in Turkey, we see that no specific authorities are present, but municipalities, if we take municipalities, for example, they open to tender these lines, and it's mostly focused on informal ownership. Vehicles have one owners or more than one owners. And we are, as a companies, we are delegated by the municipalities to manage these lines. And at the same time, our municipalities also manage lines. In Turkey, for example, these three models are used. In some cities, only municipality handles the business. In some of them, the operations are combined and distributed. So in the world, we see a lot of issues on the informal transport. and the problems are very close to each other. For example, lines mostly focused in the city center or low service quality, security, safety, punctuality, reliability problems also arise. And the fact that there are no single conductors. And again, technical problems, aging vehicle fleets are also problematic. And the informal transportation methods have these problems in general. So, from the perspective of a mayor of a municipality, they require 5 things. First of all, high service quality, citizen satisfaction. To ensure that is the case, you have to provide high quality service. And to do that, these private, we have to improve the atmosphere that these private companies are working in. That's the only way we can satisfy the mayors and the authorities, because they are being elected and they want to be re-elected. So they want to provide great service to their citizens. And again, these efforts should be more efficient. Okay, these are the requirements, these are the requests. So both the administrations and the municipalities, they expect a lot of things, but what can we do about it? Should we institutionalize them? Should we bring in new contract models? Or how we can do that? We are always asking these questions. When we're trying to solve these problems, for example, if there's a problem with a line or when you want to start a new line, one of the biggest issues we face is that these companies, they are creating problems because they want to change the length of lines, for example, to improve their gains. So instead of using the net model, we have to transform to a gross model. But while doing that, in order to reduce the costs falling into administrations, they have to follow some procedures. So instead, when we go to gross cost contract, we are trying to minimize the total fleet kilometer by integrated public transportation. And again here, the integrated public transportation and having main arteries and arteries that feed these networks are important. In our contracts, we try to follow the win-win principle, and it's all about sharing. When we look at the goals of the system, again, I can summarize some of them. It's about increasing the efficiency, reliability, and accessibility of public transportation, and providing integrated, multimodal, and simple public transportation. Also, our goals include more stable business model for private operators, because since their income in gross cost contract depends on the number of passengers, their income change from season to season, for example, and they want more stable income. Otherwise, they experience a lot of issues. With the change to this business model, we can provide more stable income to them, and with that, increasing quality of service and also passenger satisfaction, and also optimizing public transportation network and increasing efficiency are some of our goals. And when you combine all of these things, you reduce the negative impact to the environment. In general, about 20% of all emissions are caused by the transportation, and public transportation takes up a significant portion of that. Okay, so if we consider our main steps to achieve our goals, back in 2016, Kayseri Ulaşım, Kayseri Transport authorized to manage all public transportation. Before that, as a company, we were only operating the railway systems, but after 2016, we became a bigger association, and we are like the authority on everything related to transportation, public transportation in the city. And after that, in 2017, after about 1.5 years of work, we signed a contract with the individual operators based on a gross cost model. And we got the freedom to increase the efficiency. And later, in 2018, we established a cooperative that involves all private business operators. And we have about 400 buses. About a quarter of them are being organized at the moment under this cooperative. And specifically for Kayseri, on the left side you see the former structure. You see Kayseri municipality, and you can see that different operators are present, but current model after 2016 is a more inclusive one. And also with individual private bus operators, we signed a contract based on gross cost. If you look at that gross cost contract model, each private bus owner or private share owner in buses accepted, and they committed to accepting the contract, but each bus owner or share owner had to sign a commitment, and they became a side in the contract. And the main principles of this model is about the payment is based on kilometers, and then it's about, as a bonus, it takes into consideration the service quality. And to ensure the service quality, we conduct surveys. Some of them are covert, and we also watch video camera footage to identify the service quality, and we give them points, and according to their ranking we give out bonuses. As I've said, step by step we're trying to improve the system, and the earnings we get from improving the system, we share it with everyone, with the stakeholders. So you can see on the right side, first year it was about 8,800 kilometers, but later it changes because we're trying to improve the system. We are reforming the lines, and we are sharing what we earn from that improvement with the stakeholders so that we can increase the overall satisfaction of citizens. This is our former bus network. There are about 9,000 trips per day, which all of them go in the city center, and about 70 lines pass on the same street, which creates a huge congestion of buses because it's a city with only one single center, and everybody wants to reach the center, or they want to reach the hospital in the center, which creates a congestion. So we call it disrupted bus lines in the conventional bus networks. It is difficult to plan in a network like this because when there are a lot of different lines on the same route, it is difficult to plan them, and it's difficult to plan them according to the needs of the passengers. So instead, we reorganized it, restructured it to have one main line and then feeder lines, which makes our job much easier when it comes to planning. It's much more efficient. It's less vehicles, less kilometers, more passengers. So that this is one of the reasons why we changed the model, so that we have the freedom to improve the efficiency. Before switching to this model, you don't have that freedom to improve. And it was very difficult to make changes in the old system. So this is our planned bus network. You saw the previous one. This is our plan, our goal. It includes about 17 main lines, and then other feeder lines are feeding the main lines. 5 lines currently have been completed. And as I've mentioned before, when you use these main lines, you need to feed them with the feeder lines. We have 7 different switching stations where people can switch to other buses. And with that we increase efficiency, which means reduction in costs. In 2017 we were transporting about 0.8 per kilometer, but now that number is increased to 1.063. So in 4 years, in about 3 to 4 years, we achieved about 33% improvement in efficiency. And this was mostly about switching to gross model instead of the net model. But of course, after the pandemic, some things change. You can see the data. So we mentioned before the amount of passengers increased from 0.8 to 1 to 1. And in the pictures you can see the before and after pictures. You can see how buses were crowded before, how they were empty. But now after, you can see that more passengers, about 10 to 15 passengers, are traveling in the buses. Another example is the city center. You can see before and after pictures. You can see the amount of buses and on the same street and the same time of day. In 2021, you see there are less buses in the city center. Another photo of a central square in the city. You can see the congestion of buses. This is, I think, one of the most important signs of informal transport, clearly visible in the picture. In 2021, the recent photos show that we have less congestion of buses. And reducing the amount of buses here doesn't create any negative impacts to the citizens. So the service is about the same for them, but the amount of buses are reduced. And we talked about increasing satisfaction of the passenger, and there are different surveys that I want to show you. We do them every year, but if you can compare it here between 2016 and 2020, you can see that the passenger satisfaction increased from 56% to 68%. And we also conducted survey with the operators. You can see those data below, because also you can see the driver satisfaction change, because driver satisfaction also affects passenger satisfaction. So you can see there's a great increase in driver satisfaction from 43% to 62%. Of course, this improvement starts from the ground and it goes up. It starts from the top and trickles down below. When you make the operators happy, then the drivers are happy. If the drivers are happy, then passengers are happy. So we have to look at it as a whole picture. And all of this picture in return results the happiness of the elected officials. So an increase in customer satisfaction from 39% to 68% in 5 years, and complaints per million passengers reduced by 37% as well. An operator's revenue is not affected from unstable income model because they are now in a much more stable model, and this is very critical. Thanks to these improvements we made, because we switched to gross cost model, in total we achieved about more than 15 million kilometers, which results in a reduction about 17,000 tons of CO2 emissions. If we hadn't switched that model, each year we were going to pay the costs of these emissions. As a result, to sum up, the system is currently more efficient, more sustainable, more environment friendly, and more passenger oriented. Now we achieved that, but not completely. We are still moving forward, but we achieved a lot. As a result, to conclude, I want to thank you and say that before switching to gross cost model, we were receiving a lot of negative feedback from the operators. But with the gross cost model, we increased both the passenger satisfaction and the operator satisfaction while making the system more efficient and safer. Also, increasing the satisfaction passenger, we are attracting citizens to use public transportation much more commonly. Thank you for listening to me.
Actually, it's a very detailed, it's a good example of a reform steps. We know that there are a lot of things that you are still planning to do for better structuring this for the future. And then what we have seen recently in different Turkish cities, actually, let me give the example from Istanbul, for example, in terms of the individually owned buses or city of Edirne, they have a similar projects with different methodologies. So we are very eager to see the results of these cities efforts as well. The only one point is that maybe it could have been better to summarize this in a bit shorter time for helping us to stay in the time limit of the panel. But I'm sure that our next speakers will be helping us to reach the time target of the panel as well. So now I would like to go to Mexico City now. We have Angel with us. Thank you, Angel, once again joining us this early time it's an early morning for Mexico City. And then I really think the Mexican cities are very similar to Turkish cities. We have a lot of similarities, and then from that perspective, your earlier experience is quite important here. So I know that you had also different practices of the reform. Maybe you could be sharing with us your experience in this regard, and we can see how that can be also used as an example for different cities as well. Angel, please, the floor is yours.
Hello, good morning from Mexico. Good afternoon, Turkey. Here we go. I was asked to talk about our informal system and how we got into a formal one. And the most important message is the change in mentality, at least in Mexico. This is how it has, that our system has evolved from 1953 up to now. Initially, in these times, we had a formal private service. Let me put this. And afterwards, in 81, we got a city-owned bus system, but was competing with an informal system of jeepneys, colectivos, combis that you can see on the photo below. In 1995, the bus city-owned system broke down. And we were just living with informal stage minibuses. In 2005, we instrumented a Metrobus service, which was a BRT service with a public-private partnership. And it has evolved to a 7-bus BRT line. We still have this minibus informal service, which is changing into what we call corridors, transportation corridors. We are now worried about the shared transit, the network transit companies, which in a way they are also an informal system, and we have to work on that now. How we return to our formality? It was a very slow return. It has taken about 25 years to get into that. We had a regulated minibus service, which in reality they did what they wanted, into a real regulation BRT and truck corridors. And we changed from individual permits to a company concession, basically on a route basis. There was an important change in the mentality and in the image. I cannot see the slide. They were, sorry, I don't see the slide. Oh. We look to the regulation, to the organization, and an important part to technology and infrastructure. The steps that we took to go to a formal world. The previous scheme, we have individual permits, vans and minibuses, one man, one bus operation, daily payment for the driver to the owner of the permit, business in the hands of the driver, no maintenance, high costs, and oversupply, no service programming. We changed to a concession per route with buses articulated, be-articulated, even double-decker buses. We made our one man, one bus partners of the system. We changed to big weekly payment. We had a centralized administration and control. We looked for economies of scale in fleet management, and we programmed the service based on demand. The stakeholders' roles were 4 basic ones. It was created a public entity in charge of the regulations, the bus operating companies, a bus financial entity, and a fare collection entity. Of course, the city had to make a contribution both on system safety and city investments in infrastructure. Key elements to achieve this success. Leadership. We needed a transportation people that could work with the basic people. This was very, very important. Lots of efforts were made that consultants, the government promoted the change, but it didn't work. The way was to have a leadership from the transportation people. That was very, very important. We changed the mentality from one man, one bus to partners of the change, to promote themselves the change, and we fortunately succeeded. We changed the technology and the image of the system, and we empowered the people. Basically, transportation people were in charge of buying the buses and operating them, and the city building the infrastructure needed and the prepayment. We changed the chip. Took more than 25 years to change the chip, but we succeeded. Informal drivers need to understand that there's a need to change. Training is very, very important. We have to integrate the workers, the people that operate the bus into the performance stages. And we had to convince 4 stakeholders, the bus, the financial part, the fare system, and the regulated bodies. At the beginning, we are talking about 95. We thought we could do the change in a very quick way. We learned that it has to be in a slow mode. There were 4 key policies. The network, to organize the network, try to organize a network. The technology, look into the first systems, basically information systems, the operating systems. To do it by stages, basically, do line number 1, 2, 3 in steps. And sorry, I don't see the presentation completely. And the last one, it's how we can organize the system. We've made several questions, and I think these questions are applied in all our informal systems. The first one is, how do we have a transportation leader that can deliver the message to the one-man, one-bus structure? Can we align the different stakeholders on the same road for going formal? Can the fare cope with the formal structure that will be more expensive than the formal, as it implies taxes, social benefits, organization, better buses, technology, and so on? Can technology and new innovations help in the process of formalizing the transportation sector? To what extent? Can we break the fear for change? What carrots we need to make it feasible and keep up in the change on the long run? Better efficiency versus losing employment. Is that the right equation? And the last one, that is, it will become a of prime importance in the next years. Are we now promoting informality through formal schemes such as shared network transportation companies and the like? I think this is an important thing to see in our countries that are developing. This informality and formality schemes tend to be cyclical. So we have to try not to promote them again. Thank you very much. Or the circular, I don't know if that's the right word. Thank you very much.
Teşekkürler. Gracias, Angel. Then there were very important keywords in your presentation, especially when I look at your keywords, the changing the mentality. It's very important. The leadership, it's very critical. You mentioned as well about the technology. These are very critical keywords for the success of these reform processes. And maybe before I make the link to the next speaker, I can explain. I can share a very little anecdote from my career. When you talk about the leadership, it brings me back to 14 years ago. It became my last days in Metropolitan Municipality of Istanbul. I was leading a task force for preparing a plan for minibus reform in Istanbul. At that time, we work around, let's say, almost like 1.5 years for preparing this reform plan, and we managed to pass all the steps to get the final blessing from the mayor. And I remember, like today, the last day that I made a presentation to the mayor, he loved the plan, actually. You know, he loved the plan. He said that it's great plan. Every aspect was considered, and I was very happy. And he was about to leave the room, and before he just left the room, he just turned back to the audience and said that, look, Kaan, I'm supporting this plan, but make sure I don't want any of this minibus owner to come to here and complain, to say something about your plan. So I said, okay, that's good. And then, of course, what happened? I resigned 2 weeks after. So it was my last month in the organization. So the support, getting the support from the decision makers are very critical for the success of such reform processes, because it's not an easy shot. It's not an easy meal to have. Anyway, now actually we have our next speaker from Istanbul. Actually, I was visiting Istanbul 2-3 weeks ago, and then we had a meeting with Sinem Hanım first time at that occasion. And then when we were talking, actually, she mentioned about the plan that they are doing now for organizing the individually owned waterborne boats in Istanbul. When we talk about the informal transport or individually owned and operated transport in many parts of the world, we always talk about the minibuses, we always talk about the regular buses or taxis, but we never talk about the boats. So in Istanbul, it's maybe one of the most important cities where the waterborne transport is playing an important role in the world. And then this similar problem is happening there as well. The similar challenge is happening there. And then Sinem Hanım has a very interesting project and initiative now on this regard. So I just want to hand over the speech to Sinem Hanım to share their experience with us. Sinem Hanım, please, floor is yours.
Teşekkürler Kaan Bey. Öncelikle nazik davetiniz için çok teşekkür ederim.
Thank you, Mr. Kaan. I would like to start by thanking for your kind invitation, and it's great pleasure to get to know our other panelists. I have a little presentation. I would like to share my screen with you. Yes, just like on land transportation, we have similar problems in marine transportation. I think that this is not limited to Turkey either. We have common problems internationally speaking, so I believe we can benefit from each other. Istanbul City Lines is where I have been assigned 2 years ago. I worked as a director general there. It's a two century, by the way, entity in Turkey. And here the structure of our institution and our partners are a little more complicated because it dates back to 1851 and even earlier, 1844. But historically, it is accepted to be founded in 1841 because Istanbul is a coastal city and because it provides sea access. The first mass transportation takes place in marine transportation, and the company is called Şirketi Hayriye in the Ottomans. That's where the city lines, as we call it, date back to. And actually, we have the world's oldest living shipyard, which was designed 2 years after Fatih conquered Istanbul. It was established in 1455 and it's called Tersane-i Amire, and it was given to the Ottoman Navy. And geographically speaking, this shipyard is a very important location. Since its establishment, şehir hatları or city lines provide mass transportation on sea waters. It was connected to maritime enterprises, then it is privatized, and then it is now a subsidiary of the municipality after privatization. We have 28 ferries and actually 32 ferries on rent, and the daily trips amount to 636 and even 700 occasionally, and we carry 40 million passengers annually. We serve on 22 lines and in 98 piers. This number of 40 million is a little small. Actually, it has a share of 3.25% in overall transportation. Although it is the first established mode of transportation, Istanbul's land-focused approach actually decreases the share of sea transportation, and it's not that preferred as we speak now. There are different reasons for that, but the changes to lifestyle, land-to-land transportation approach, as brought about by living conditions, actually are main factors. Second, we cannot actually just correctify it. Maybe our international speakers may not appreciate it because they don't know it, but people actually go to two different sides of the continent for work and living reasons, and they do not have an overlap in the sea, and due to structures like bridges and other structures, actually the interaction with sea diminishes over the years, and its share is now as low as 3.25%. When we look at the fleet, actually the number of ferries at up to 100 initially, but then this number comes down to 28. We call them vapors, and you see the picture above. Then you see the rental ferries. They set different fleet. In order to ensure that our lines are operational, we hold 650 actually trips on a daily basis, and we have a rental agreement with other companies, and we are a company actually getting this trip job through a tender, and we also sort of deliver our rights as part of the tender, another tender, to private enterprises. They are called motors or ferries in Istanbul, and they have actually public lines that they serve on behalf of our company. It's getting a little complicated here. Let me explain that. It is not just the city lines that do mass transportation, but 85% of the passengers are carried by city lines. But private companies also operate on 2 to 3 lines on behalf of the public entity. And in order for them to serve our lines, we rent ferries from private enterprises. So there are two working principles here. As city lines, we get the project based on a tender, but private carriers work with a subsidy or subvention model. This is important for the following reason. What we try to achieve, as you stated earlier, is to ensure a unity of fleet so that they can act together. And we here try to create the main reason for that. Regardless of the passengers we carry, we have a certain payment, but in private companies actually get incentive. The more passengers they carry, the more revenues they make, and that prevents us from establishing united lines, because city lines, if they have actually hours or trips that can take place before the determined hours, then they are owned by the private sector. Well, that doesn't mean a loss of revenue for us, because I do it based on a tender, but that means the revenues of Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality are damaged. It doesn't increase the number of passengers carried, and it causes confusion. That's why we want to change this. As you listen to the examples from the land transportation, there have been adjustments for Istanbul land transportation so that we can manage it like one single company through united fleet. And here this is addressed under the project sea transportation project, and we have problems concerning piers as well. The port presidency allows, for example, 2 different sea vehicles to serve passengers, but there are certain regulations setting the distance between those 2 sea crafts. So sometimes we cannot move from the same pier or actually tie the rope, and that prevents having a common trip tariff. That's why for us to move from the same pier with 2 sea craft, we need to operate like one single company. That's how we started our activities. We talk about 40 to 42 million passengers per year before the pandemic. During the pandemic, as stated earlier, there has been a 90% passenger loss. Now, this number is increasing by 50%. I do not mean to elaborate on the details here. And I told you that 3.25% is what the sea transportation accounts for. We say that it is 3.25% as for its share, but actually this is a misleading number as it cannot compete with the land modes in certain senses. But bridges or subways that are alternative to sea actually should be compared. If that is the comparison reference point, then this number can be a little higher. UITP Metrobüs has around 13%, Marmara has 6% share, metro and trams has 28%, and buses account for 48% of the entire Istanbul transportation. So we can say that actually half of the transportation in Istanbul takes place through land transportation, and we try to move away from that. The biggest issue here concerns integration. In order for you to use sea, there should be an integration concerning land transportation too. Why? Because people, when we check where people can reach within 500 meters close to their homes, actually 15 million people can access land transportation. 13 million can reach like railroad stops, but only 900,000 people can reach the piers among millions of people. So we should first let those people get to the piers easily, and Istanbul Mass Transportation Directorate pays attention to that as part of their plans. And here the new funicular systems that facilitates connection to sea transportation have been underway. Also, when we look at the sea transportation players, we see Istanbul City Lines have a very small share. The sea buses also have this share, but they IDO generally goes to other cities, withdrawing from intra-city travel, and private sea enterprises contribute by that percentage. Here we give breakdowns, and I do not mean to tire you with so much detail about the breakdowns. Before moving on to environmental pollution, let me state, as I referred to earlier, that we want to act as part of a common fleet. We want to look at how we can manage this as one single company, because environmental pollution, passenger satisfaction are all the reasons of confusion, and other actually private companies lack a fleet understanding. They try to provide services with different ferries, and that puts some pressure on their operations, because the main funding comes from IMM. This is definitely an important topic concerning the public sector, as it is about the subsidies. So how can we manage all these operations with one single logic? That's what we are trying to understand. And City Lines, actually ferry structure is one of the symbols of Istanbul, and they are actually popular and loved brands. We maintain our ferries in our shipyards, and that doesn't mean a huge effort for us. But now we have a fleet of 40 ferries, and they are completing their economic lives, and we keep their environmental impact to a minimum, but we cannot, of course, compare them with the new generation sea craft. That's why we have launched activities to decrease our environmental impact through the design of new ferries. And Actually, some of them are related to electricity-run boats. Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu signed C40 with the aim of zero carbon emission in 2050, and we wanted to model our new fleet with electrified infrastructure, and efforts are underway there. When we work with the private sector, we believe we can create a new model. The vacancy, the occupancy rate is around 20% because we provide services with a capacity of 2,000. The boats are capable of carrying 300 people only. So our new designs probably will be smaller ferries, and if they are going to run on electricities, it's a critical item so that we can determine the capacities of batteries. That's why we will try to design and develop boats that are in line with the current ferry silhouette. And we will probably decide on that together with the private sector, discussing their cost aspects to understand whether they are conducive or not, because they have 60 to 70 to 100 watt engines that are different from each other, and that means pollution for Istanbul. The pier heights are fixed, but engine heights vary, and that means a problem in terms of taking the disabled individuals to ferries. That causes dissatisfaction, especially when we talk about small boats. At this age, we still have actually difficulties accepting the disabled individuals to small boats, or we have to use support from outside. That's why we want to update our models so that we can have a unified model understanding that respects the silhouette of the current fleet. And in terms of these uniform designs, we will have relevant discussions. We will reach that decision through common sense, but we will get the opinions of the private sector and reach a consensus. Also, we have electrical conversion projects, whether we should have hybrid, whether we should have full electrical conversion devices. We need to rack our brains there, because we also have to have this transformation. We have the necessary know-how, but we should also ensure transportation in the land side, on the land side. That's why we have those activities underway. This is a new concept called Sea Taxi project for people of 10, for passengers of 10 people. Here, fast transportation will enable us to overcome the traffic issue in Istanbul, and it is a seacraft that can contribute to a certain extent, but we will use them to collect data. This will be for districts which we cannot serve through traditional lines, and we will try to understand whether new lines can be established there. We're going to obtain data from these craft and use that data to create a modeling for sea transportation, and also understand how the public sector can contribute. Here, comfort-specific boats, comfort-focused boats were designed. As you know, sea lacks comfort, generally speaking, and captains are used to that. But because Istanbul is not a sea transportation city, we wanted to focus on comfort. It looks like a high-end design, but still we had wind tests and other tests, and here we want to ensure that we collect data with smaller boats as we lack them. Previously, we are going to have 50 sea taxis, as we have actually less than 50, and they are going to contribute us in terms of having a united fleet. That would be all from my side. Thank you very much.
Coming from you, when I was listening to you, I took some notes, especially what I saw is that you mentioned about the keywords called fleet unification and trip unification. So these are actually very important steps to move from individually owned operation to the corporatization of these actors, especially when we look at, if you prepare a roadmap, we can easily put these steps as very important steps, like establishment of a fleet pool, establishment of pool of lines, establishment of a revenue and the cost pool for these individually owned operators, and as well later the staff pool, and maybe it will lead us to the establishment of a rights pool that they can put all their rights together, the licenses together under one single umbrella. Now we will move to the Southeast Asia. To Joachim, because this is a very global challenge. Actually, especially after the 1950s, when all over the world, when we saw rapid urbanization, when people started to move from rural areas to the cities, they also came with a demand to the transportation. But at that time, we have seen that there was no, let's say, enough public funds to organize public transport in many of the cities, and some individual entrepreneurs, they came with the initiatives to launch some routes, to launch some services in the cities, and during this time they also created their own rules, own routes, own schedules, and it's a global challenge what we see from Latin America to the Southeast Asia, in Africa, and as well in Turkey. Now we will hear from Joachim from the perspective from the Southeast Asian cities. They are managing a very important project from Cambodia. And Joachim, floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Kaan, for the introduction. I will project my small lot of slides here, so which will a little bit explain how it comes that I speak for Southeast Asia, because obviously I am originally from Europe, and you have mentioned different steps of my career, but I have worked for many years as well in Geneva and Brussels public transport agencies. So my background is double. It is in formal public transport, but I have also worked often in promotion of alternative modes, what is today often called micromobility. It's just cycling, car sharing, this kind of things. And I think this is the reason why Kaan has put me last in the introductory statements, because I will always figure out the two sides and stress that there are two sides to a problem, two sides of a coin, dichotomies, and I will stress them all across, and this will lead us hopefully to our discussion. So one dichotomy is the reason that brought me to Southeast Asia. It is an ASEAN German cooperation project called SMMR. I will not annoy you too much about it. With my name or with the abbreviation of the project, you will find us on the internet, on LinkedIn, and you can find out more about the project. What is interesting is that we do work for the ASEAN Land Transport Working Group and cover or address the 10 countries of the Southeast Asian region. But we do have projects in the field, so to speak, along the Mekong River, which is not the blue line, the Mekong goes like this, in Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, and south of Vietnam. Can I go forward? Another dichotomy, we have our very formal project title, Sustainable Design of Urban Mobility in Middle-Sized Metropolitan Regions. But we also have a motto, which is make sustainable mobility more real. And so to bridge the gap between the theory and what we actually have in the field. And this is the last slide about the project itself, where for once we have a triangle, not two sides, but three. We have a number of key topics, and the first one is the Metropolitan Transport Executives, because we are a governance-oriented project. And we have worked with UITP quite a lot about developing a model for transport executives or transport authorities, as they are called in many places. And I've seen examples of this now from Kayseri and Mexico. And we try to to adapt this three-level model of strategic level, tactical level, operational level to the circumstances in Southeast Asia. We are also developing more technical topics, and what we do with these is that we develop the discussion about these topics with our partners on different levels to bring about project ideas and bring them to the project concept and then spin them off to other institutions, like for instance the CDIA, which is actually a Pan-Asian institution that helps to develop projects for the Asian Development Bank, sorry. So even in Turkey. And the best project we've brought about so far, the Lighthouse project, is to create a cable car between the capital of Laos, so a telepheric, like here, between the capital of Laos, Vientiane, and the small city of Nong Khai on the other side in Thailand, which is the most formal kind of transportation you can imagine, and especially if you cross an international border, which is the case here. But at the same time, this is only 3 kilometers long, and by any means, this cannot pretend to transport anybody. It is just a way to hop over the river, which is not as wide as the Bosporus, of course, but still a considerable barrier. And so here again, we have the two elements, the two aspects. Yes, we do have a very formal transport infrastructure and project ongoing here, but it can only work, it only makes sense if on both sides it connects to the actually existing transport systems, which are partly formal, the BRT from Vietnam, but most of them are informal and private. We mentioned Park and Ride, it's private transport on both sides. And then the Lao intercity, the Thai intercity, it is private transport. And when you look at Nong Khai urban transport, for instance, it is the typical tuk-tuk and other things. There is no urban transport, no formal urban transport at all. And so very clearly, the cable car can only work if it connects to all sorts of transport on both sides, including informal transport. And the informal transport can only serve the cross-border transport needs if it is connected to the cable car, because informal transport cannot cross the international border. And so this is the kind of typical situation and special situation, but which we find in many other instances. I mentioned that we try to adapt the internationally valid state-of-the-art and experience to Southeast Asia. And so we asked ourselves, and we looked around, we found out quite quickly what is so special about Southeast Asia. And it is, of course, well, yeah, we know it since, for instance, cities and automobile dependence of Newman Kenworthy and the Millennium Cities database of UITP, that the urban structure in Southeast Asia is quite different from many other regions in the world, with less urbanization, and when urbanization occurs, it is more dense. And we now hear about the 15-minute city and this kind of new concepts in Western cities. The 15-minute city has been the principle of urban organization in Southeast Asia for many decades and many years. And the other element, of course, Southeast Asian cities have grown like all other cities, but they have grown on a different path, from walking to cycling and from cycling to motorbikes. And the motorbike is really the very typical means of transport. You type urban transport Vietnam and you find those wonderful photos of motorbikes flowing on large bridges and so forth. Here is a photo from my neighborhood in Phnom Penh, where I'm based, which is a city of more than 2 million inhabitants, the motorbike is the main mode of transport. 80% of traffic is made by motorbikes, and the motorbike is a typical family car, right? And even in the very big cities that are comparable to Istanbul or Mexico, Bangkok, Kuala Lumpur, Jakarta, Manila, Ho Chi Minh, and Hanoi, the motorbike is still very important. In Jakarta, 50% of transport is done by motorbike. So the motorbike has been doing the job for a long time, and public transport has developed only very recently when those motorbikes transformed to cars, to four-wheeled cars that take so much more space to transport the same amount of people. And Bangkok is a very good example for a city that, because of this, only 20 years ago was quintessential for urban gridlock and congestion, and now, thanks to mass transit, is in a bit better situation. But it's very important to see this different path of development that the city bus, as you know it, and have had for generations in Turkey or in Mexico and many other places, does not exist like this in Southeast Asia. And so let's come to the topic. A city like Phnom Penh, a capital city, more than 2 million inhabitants now, they know that they have to implement public transport before they reach a situation like Bangkok or Jakarta and others of gridlock. And so they have implemented a city bus like 5 years ago with donations from partner countries. And they have a fleet of about 200 city buses. And then in March 20, last year, COVID arrived. And one of the first things that the city government did was to close down the city buses in order to reduce the risk of contamination and so forth. You know the story. And here I share a newspaper excerpt of May last year, 2020, where the announcement is city bus prepares to resume services with very formal training about how to deal with the COVID thing and so forth. Well, the news is that we are now more than a year later, and of course, the city bus still has not resumed service because of the qualities of formal transport are also its weaknesses in many instances. And in this case in particular, there are two weaknesses. First of all, who will take the responsibility for the COVID situation? It is quite difficult to do that in a bureaucratic system like the city bus. And second, the city bus is heavily subsidized for operations. Like 90%, 95% of operations are subsidized in normal times. And so I wouldn't say this is necessarily the case, but definitely not running the city bus is a very good relief for the city budget. And this may be one of the reasons why services have not resumed in this city of 2 million people. But of course, there are transport services, and have been other transport services which are very important in the country, like I'm sure in Turkey and Mexico, other places. It's the intercity transport. And the intercity transport obviously is a privately operated transport system, and it is suffering a lot because of internal travel restrictions and because of missing tourists. And so the private companies that ran city buses have looked for other ways to earn some money. And since people could not, during the lockdowns, go towards the markets, the private companies use their intercity coaches to bring the markets to the lockdown neighborhoods. But of course, this shows how courageous these entrepreneurs are, but this cannot replace their normal business, of course. And between the urban transport and the intercity transport, we have the regional transport, which is operated by these typical buses. They are all yellow because they are school buses from Korea. And they are what we heard, one man, one owner, one operator companies, sometimes a bit bigger, but they are micro enterprises. And they are very versatile and resilient, and they have been operating all the time during the crisis. I don't have statistics about how much their traffic has reduced because obviously they don't have statistics and don't communicate them. But I do live next to this bus stop, and I can see that as soon as in the evening there is an announcement of some alleviation of COVID restrictions, in the next morning the service is there, and the supply side is reacting immediately. And this only informal buses can do it. I mean, there are many arguments why informal buses should be formalized and more. So it is a bit my part of the introductory session to show that informal buses can do many things that others cannot. And fortunately for the population of Phnom Penh and the wider region, the informal buses are here to do the job because the public city bus is failing entirely in this particular situation. Now, the dichotomy that I mentioned is still active here and valid here, of course, because I'm not saying that just leave it to the informal market and it is this problem will be solved. There are many shortcomings of the purely informal and self-regulated system, which I need not explain here. But the question is how to deal with that. Is it to abolish the informal system and formalize it for what it is doing, or is it rather what I would propose to include it in a multimodal, interdisciplinary transport policy, where the role of the public authorities is to provide effective planning and infrastructures rather than to subsidize operations. And their role is to cultivate a thriving market of mobility solutions, mobility as a service, including intermodality, micromobility, all these things. And to, combining these two, develop transit-oriented development that has this infrastructure and organizes this multimodality. And so these are all the keywords that we have now in the literature and public policy debate. And we also use the avoid, shift, improve approach, which is very handy in this. And you may have heard about Singapore, of course. I have not mentioned Singapore among the big cities of Southeast Asia, but it obviously is one. And Singapore is very famous for its integrated planning and state-driven, excellent, world-class transport system. And they are developing this idea of transport-oriented development, which is also well known from Hong Kong and Japan and others. But I'd like to combine this with this picture here of Phnom Penh on the left-hand side of the 1960s, where we do have the central marketplace in the middle, and this is the central bus station. Both infrastructures exist exactly like this still today, and everything exists like today, except that the scene around it, the buzzing life around it is quite different. And the problem is of Phnom Penh that these remain the only coordinated TOD infrastructures in the city. And after this this inspired period of the 1960s, or it was created a bit before, they have forgotten to do what Singapore and many other places are reinventing today, which is to combine the transport infrastructure and the marketplace, and to organize the market not only in the central market, but also for transportation around it. And so I would like to suggest that we remember this and really find a way to combine the good practice of a regulator public authority that regulates and creates the infrastructure that allows businesses to thrive and develop their respective services according to their respective strengths. And in doing this, to do this, of course, in a modern way, not in the 19th century way, but in the 21st century way. And here, when we talk about infrastructure, we also talk mainly and in more and more about information. And it is very important to make the market visible and accessible for users. And so this is something that we strive to do by not by forcing the private operators into a timetable, but by making evident the timetables of the market to the user, so that the user can really have a choice in the big variety of service offers. And so we are talking with one company that does this kind of work worldwide, which has been quite successful. They tell me in Mexico, and you will tell me whether it's true. I don't know how much they work in Turkey, and we look very much forward in supporting the authorities and the operators in really not fighting each other, but cooperating and developing a true public-private partnership in the most noble sense. And I yield the floor to the discussion, and thank you very much for organizing this nice session.
Thank you, Joachim. Thank you. It was great, actually. It's in Turkish. We have a proverb called "Kitabı ortasından okumak." As usual, you are starting to read the book from the middle. So it's really helpful, and then it's really widening our view on this challenge. And there are some questions coming from the audience. I would like to remind to the participants, if you wish to ask a question to the panelists, please use your tool in front of you, and then our technicians are sending me the questions. And if you don't mind, Joachim, I can start the questions with you, because your point is very interesting. Because, but maybe it's good to clarify it a little bit and elaborate it a little bit, because we were always using, let's say, the keyword of formalization or reforming, but what you are more focusing is integration. This is how I see it. Can you a little bit elaborate it? You know, how this, let's say, integration is different than reforming or formalizing. So what are the key things in this difference? Maybe in 1 minute, because I want to ask questions to everyone as well.
Yes. Well, the formalization wants to actually replace the makeshift 20-seat bus by a nice, proper 40-seater. Wants to replace the departure when you're full by a departure on schedule, and the no subsidy by a net cost and then a gross cost contract. This often kills the business case of the operation. The integration is different. You will find that those informal operators improvise bus stops in the street. They squat a square somewhere and say, this is now our bus stop. This creates lots of problems. And so the municipality here says, okay, but no, we have this place over there that you can use for your improvised bus stop. Please do it there. And they will regulate the fact that the bus stop moves over there. But what they should do is to make sure that this bus stop is not somewhere where there is space available, but it should be next to the train station or next to the intercity coach station. And the regulation can go a little bit further than that, saying you should not idle here half of the day. You should only come here to change passengers and then go and park somewhere else. This kind of things. So provide a service that integrates the informal service into the multimodal system, and not try to tell them what they should do differently without integrating them, without giving them the counterpart. But of course, over time, this integration will necessitate a stronger regulation, and I'm all for it. Safety, passenger comfort, all these things require an effort on the side of the operators, and it can be pushed forward gently by regulation. It's necessary as part of the evolution. But if you want to switch them directly, you kill the whole service and people will not have any service at all, especially in the outskirts of the metropolitan region. This was 1 minute.
Thank you so much, Joachim. Actually, maybe there is another question which is linked to this topic, and maybe I can ask this question to Feyzullah. How you think, when we are talking about corporatization, and then when we tell that it will help us in terms of the sustainability for the future, would that be a problem in terms of agility? This was also a point in the presentation of Joachim. How do you see this, Feyzullah? Also, I remember you were organizing an event recently, and then there was a discussion that there was some cost structure in the event that you organized recently. It was saying that the cost of individually owned operators to produce the service is less than the public companies in many parts of the world. So, if you consider this both of them, what would be your reaction?
Teşekkür ederim. Şimdi yani Joachim de söyledi zaten.
As Mr. Joachim also mentioned, when we talk about institutionalization, we talk about increased costs, but we have to also keep in mind that private sector has we have to think all that in that formalization efforts. In many different places, we see that they are doing it by involving private sector as well in institutionalization. So it's not like making it a state thing only. It's about also benefiting from the agility and low-cost operations of the private sector. And you've also mentioned that the costs are higher in the municipalities compared to private sectors, and there are many reasons of it. But I want to say this, in the projects that we're going to conduct, we have to include the low-cost methods of the private sectors, both in integration and otherwise. But maybe most importantly, when we talk about integration, if I have to give an example from the Kayseri, the private sector, their structure dates to the past, so they have more vehicles than they need. The supply of vehicles is higher than they need, so if they restructure that, it will also help with their costs. Of course, they're agile, they work with low cost, but they're trying to give the service that you can give it 10 vehicles, they're trying to give that service at 30 vehicles. So reduction of vehicles is also an important aspect. And that can most of the time happen with institutional effort.
One question to you, which can go to you. It's about the participants are asking us how the cities could benefit from digitalization and technology for their roadmap in terms of better organizing these individually owned operators. How do you see the role of the technology? Would that be really helpful for you to organize better these individual actors in Istanbul? You are muted.
Pardon, fark ettim sonradan. Tabii kesinlikle faydası olacağını düşünüyorum.
Of course, it will be helpful because the amount of vehicles we have is not very high. The private sector have a lot of vehicles, but because of the reasons I mentioned, we can't meet in the middle in a common method. Even though we increased the amount of vehicles we have as the city lines, it's not enough. We have to do more trips, but reduce costs. And when we also involve the private sector as well, sometimes they also experience the issues of not optimizing it enough because they focus on high amounts of passengers. But because we're a public institution, we mostly focus on comfort and service quality. But by integrating both with more trips and higher quality service, we can satisfy public. And meanwhile, reducing the budget of the public budget.
Maybe it's a $1 million question. I know it's a very tough one and not easy to explain in 1 minute, but what could be your main advice for the cities that are on this road to ensure the political support for that one, and as well ensure about the participation from these individually owned actors? If there are some key things that you could share with us on this one.
Well, for me, the basic part for Mexico is that the leadership from the transportation people. They cannot be just thinking that the authority can solve all their problems, that they have to work the ideas, promote their ideas, and be part of the solution. I think that's normally the authority says, do this, do that, but doesn't take the opinion from the transport people. So I think it's an important part, the most important part, at least for Mexico, work with the transportation people.
Thank you so much, Angel. Thank you. And then I thank you all speakers actually, and then all the participants for this panel. It was very, very interesting. And then I took some notes while I'm listening everyone. Maybe I can, in one last minute, I can just summarize. I can try to summarize. I know it's not easy to summarize all the discussion, but I can at least go through my notes. What I note here is that I saw that institutional capacity is very important on the side of the transport authorities and as well on the side of the operators for this road. I see the institutional capacity is very important. Technology is an important driver that can help us to better integrate operators or to better organize them, especially in many parts of the world. They are still not using even the automated fare collection systems. We don't know the data. So starting first from the automated fare collection systems could be even a very good first step, what we can be telling. Going step by step is very important. This is what I understood, especially from Feyzullah. It's not easy thing. It's not easy to swallow everything in once, but to go step by step is important. I see from different parts of the speakers, there is no single formula. We need to develop our own recipe for fitting our local regulations or local conditions. It's very important. Starting with the most organized group is very important. It's very critical. It's very critical. And maybe I can tell from my own experience. Maybe it was not mentioned by different people, but each step may turn into a problem. This is what we have seen in Istanbul in the past. When you open the new box, it may come with another surprise. Each steps may turn into a problem. I saw from all of you that non-technical aspects are the most critical ones. It's not about the model of the buses or the devices. That non-technical aspects are the most critical one, and the participation is the key. the participation is the key for the success. So these were my quick notes of the sessions that we can see like a takeaways from the session. And once again, thank you so much for sharing your Sunday time, Sunday morning for Angel, Sunday evening for Joachim, and this beautiful Sunday afternoon for Sinem Hanım and Feyzullah Bey. And I thanks once again to all the participants. And let's go for the closing session of the forum, huh?